think it's fair to say that some Championship clubs did better than others in this transfer window. So guys, welcome back to the channel. What I thought we'd do for today's video is rank every Championship club on their transfer business from worst to best. So we'll be putting them into these 5 categories. A club either had a poor transfer window, could have done more, solid, great, or unreal. Your club, let me know down below, where would you place them in those categories. Just before we do hop into anything though, a big shout out to our sponsors over at OneFootball. As always, you can find the new OneFootball app in the top line of the description down below. If you want to keep updated with all the ongoings around the Championship, then OneFootball is the place to go ahead and do that. Obviously, we do have Championship football going on tonight and tomorrow, so if you want to get updates on all those games whenever a goal goes in, OneFootball is the place to be. Also, if you want to look at any of your new signings in a little bit more detail, they have all the latest stats on there, so you can keep updated with all that good stuff. So I'll leave a link in the top line of the description down below. Also, as the transfer window has now shut, if you'd like to see sort of an updated table prediction, make sure to leave a like on today's video and I'll get working on that. But without any further ado, let's hop into this one. So let's start out with my club, Preston North End, where it was an incredibly quiet transfer window. In fact, we only signed one player, Emil Reece-Jacobson. It wasn't a position where we needed to strengthen. We were in desperate need of a new number 9, and although he is fairly untested at this level, there has been promising signs early on. Apart from that, the biggest win from this transfer market from Preston's point of view was keeping hold of our big players. Obviously, it's been well documented. We've spoken about it quite a bit on the channel so far. A lot of big players are now running into their final years of their contracts, and there was the fear that there'd be this mass exodus of players from North End this season. That hasn't been the case as of yet. We need to tie these players down to contracts, the likes of Ben Pearson, Ben Davis, Alan Brown and Daniel Johnson, but for the time being, there's been no major outgoing. So from that aspect, I wouldn't say it's been a disaster of a window, but I definitely think we could have done more. So I think that that category is tailor-made for Preston, really. I think that a couple of loanees from Premier League clubs, another option going forward, wouldn't have gone amiss for us. Next up then to Rotherham United. Now, for a club coming up from League One to the Championship, the first transfer window is always absolutely crucial. And I think that Rotherham have learnt from their mistakes from previous years, where I think that the recruitment when they have come up has been a little bit slack. This time round, I think they've actually done some really nice deals in here. Loan players are always going to be important, and I think they've got 3 decent ones on their hands here. Jamal Blackburn comes in as their first choice goalkeeper. Josh Hurst is another option going forward, and Joseph Zoon, although things didn't quite work out at Derby, they have added real quality in those wide areas. Another example of that, Kieran Sadlier, who we've already seen flashes from so far this season. They've strengthened that back line as well and didn't have any major outgoing. So from Rotherham's perspective, I'd say it's been a solid transfer window. I think they've done some really nice deals in there. Next up then to Birmingham, where it has been an incredibly busy transfer window. Now, the major outgoing from Birmingham was Jude Bellingham, and this transfer window was always going to be a case of how are they going to redistribute that money around the squad. What do I think of their additions? I actually think they've done quite well. I think that the core group of players that they have at the club now is a hell of a lot stronger than they were last season. We've already seen some of the improvements defensively. Someone like George Friend, who they picked up on a free transfer. The spine of that squad is so much stronger now. You know, I know that Lee Camp became a bit of a cult hero in the end, but having Neil Etheridge is such an upgrade on that. Having Mikel San Jose coming in as well, massive improvement into their midfield. And they've got also quite a few options going forward now, a few different dynamic attackers. You know, Jonathan Lecco, I'm interested to see how he gets on over the season. Ivan Sanchez has already shown some flashes of brilliance. So for Birmingham, I'm going to say it's been a great transfer window. I think the core group of players is looking a lot stronger. Next up to Huddersfield Town. Now, Huddersfield have actually started out in the league not too badly under Carlos Corberán. However, I do feel as if that is papering over the cracks of what was really quite a shoddy transfer window. Now, don't get me wrong, some of the deals that they have done, I don't actually particularly mind. You know, Pippa's come in as a new fullback option. I think that he's adapted quite well so far. Danny Ward, by no means is a bad striker at this level. You know, he's someone who can score you about 6 or 7 goals a season, and Naby Sarr, I think, was a decent option coming over from Charlton as well. However, with the departing Colin Grant, Steve Mounier, Kachunga, I know he didn't contribute too many goals last season, but he did play quite a lot. The squad's got a lot weaker this season, and their options going forward now are so light. With only Danny Ward and Fraser Campbell going forward, with their injury records, you feel as if this squad does pick up a couple of injuries, they really could run into a rough patch this season. So for Huddersfield, for me, I think it has been a very poor transfer window. Next up then to Millwall. Now, for Millwall in this transfer window, it was always about trying to bridge that gap between themselves and the top 6 by adding a little bit more quality to that squad. Do I think they've done that. I think they've done quite well in this transfer window, to be honest with you. They've had no major outgoings from that squad, and looking at some of the additions that they made on loan deals, I think they picked up some really good options here. Obviously, it's not quite happened for Troy Parrott yet because of injuries, which is a real shame because I think that was some coup when they actually picked him up. Kenneth Hall comes over as quite a different option to Troy Parrott, but someone who I think could adapt quite well to fitting in at Millwall. An alternative to someone like Bodvarsson going forward, I think that's quite a good deal. Getting Ryan Woods back for the season's absolutely massive. I'm a massive fan of Ryan Woods. I think that Gary Rowett knows how to get the best out of him. And even someone like Mason Bennett, I think, has shown real flashes in the Millwall shirt so far. So for Millwall, I'm going to say they had a great transfer window. I think they got some good deals. Next up then to Middlesbrough. Now, it was reported that they did miss out on Yannick Bolasie on deadline day. Had they got that deal over the line, I would be tempted to bump them up a tier or two. But even so, it's not been a bad transfer window for Middlesbrough. They did lose a bit of experience with some of those departing players, but what they have brought in, I think, is a whole bunch of talent. Initially, I wasn't sold on Schubert Akpom, but he's fitting so far really well to Championship life. He's been in the goals for them. That obviously was the major outlay in terms of money being spent this window. Sam Morsey, really good option from Wigan, good combative midfielder, and they've also used the loan market quite well, bringing in Bettinelli from Fulham, who's got a whole bunch of experience behind him, and Patrick Roberts as well. Getting him back on loan for the season was a really good bit of business from Borough. Overall, I think it's been a solid transfer window for them. Like I say, if they did get that Bolasie deal done, I probably would have put it up a tier. Then we get to Luton Town, who I think have really identified where the squad was weak from last season, and I think that they've identified pretty much all of those issues in this transfer window. Defence was a big one for Luton with the amount of goals they shipped last season. They brought in the likes of James Bree this time on a permanent basis. Tom Lockyer comes in to shore them up at the back and adds another option to make them a bit more competitive in those areas. But they've also brought in a couple of really high quality loan players, which I think is massive for them. Norrington Davis comes over from Leicester City as a really highly rated midfielder. Did really well for Blackpool in League One last season. In 10 appearances, scored 4 goals for them. I think in a full season in the Championship, he could do really well for Luton, especially in the system they like to play with their midfielders. So for Luton, I'm going to say it's been a great transfer window. I think they've identified the weaknesses from last time. Next up then to Barnsley, and up until deadline day, I probably would have put Barnsley in the bottom category for this transfer window. Things really weren't looking all too promising. They lost a key player in Jacob Brown, and going forward, I thought they were looking incredibly light. However, on transfer deadline day, they did complete deals for Herbie Kane coming over on a permanent basis, and they've also got Matty James from Leicester for this season. So 2 really quality midfielders coming in there to add options and make them a little bit more competitive. They also kept hold of the likes of Alex Mower and Coley Woodrow as well, which I think was massive for Barnsley's season. However, they do still lack a striker or two for me going forward. So for Barnsley, like I say, it's a tough one to judge. I've thrown them in the could have done more category for that simple reason of going forward. I think they could have done a little bit more business, but on deadline day, they certainly pulled things out of the bag and rescued them a little bit. With Norwich City, I do have to admit that I really think that they have absolutely smashed this transfer window. Listen, they have lost the likes of Ben Godfrey and Jamal Lewis, but had you told Norwich fans at the start of this window that going into this Championship season, you'd still have the likes of Max Aarons, Emi Buendia, Todd Cantwell, Timu Pukki, I'm sure they'd have all absolutely snatched your hands off. And as well as that, they've also added real quality to supplement those talents in the squad. You know, Jordan Hugill guaranteed goals in the Championship. Lacheta's a really exciting option. Kieran Dell comes in as another creative option into that number 10 role. And I think that Norwich are another real example of a club who's used the loan market really well this window. Ben Gibson is that replacement for Ben Godfrey. Javi Quintilla, I think, is a really exciting one. And Oliver Skipp, who's already shown loads of quality from midfield. Norwich, they are going into that top tier. It's been an unreal window for them. Next up then to Watford. This transfer window was always going to be about keeping hold of what they had rather than adding to what was already a massive squad. In terms of the outgoings, most of what we expected. However, they did manage to keep hold of Sarr, one player who I don't think anyone expected them to keep hold of. Kapui, another one who's still at the club as well. The incomings, there's still quite a few unknowns about a few of these, but I like some of the additions that they have made. Jeremy Ngaki has already shown what he's about. I think that was an excellent deal coming over from West Ham. James Garner as a nice option in midfield from Man United for this season. And Glenn Murray as well. I also think he'll chip in with a few goals. Overall for Watford, I think it's been a solid transfer window. It was always about maintaining a squad which would be competitive at the top end of the Championship, and I think they've got that. Next up then to Sheffield Wednesday. Now, at the start of the window, I probably would have had Wednesday at the bottom of the pile. Things weren't looking all too encouraging. They lost what was pretty much the spine of that squad for the last 3 or 4 years if you look at the major outgoings, but they managed to really pull things out the bag in the final few weeks of the transfer window. Not only have they replaced the players that they lost from last season, I also think they've added real quality into that squad. If we look at the loanees, for example, Aidan Flint, Izzy Brown and Jack Marriott, I think 3 excellent additions, which makes Wednesday a hell of a lot stronger, their core of their squad. And they've also added real championship experience with some of these additions. You know, Josh Windass, who's now back, Callum Patterson, Shea Dunkley, Ellis Kachunga, although not particularly a lethal player at this level, a solid player who makes them a little bit more competitive going forward. And I think that with all these additions, they've got every chance of staying up now. So overall for Wednesday, I think it's been a great window. After that, we then get to Reading, where by their standards, it was a fairly standard transfer window. We normally get quite a bit of drama going on around Reading when it comes to transfer windows in terms of loads of incomings, loads of outgoings. This time round, it was a little bit more balanced. The major incoming was Ovie Ejaria. Getting him on a permanent basis from Liverpool, I think, will be massive for them going forward, especially with John Swift out injured for as long as he is. I think that Ovie Ejaria, a lot of the creative burden will be thrown on him. They've also brought in some quite high quality loan deals. Alpha Semedo, who we saw on loan at Forest last season, and Thomas Estes, who's come over from Porto as well. Overall for Reading, I'd say it's been a solid transfer window. For Bournemouth, it was quite a similar story to Watford really. It was always about keeping hold of what they had rather than adding to what was already a pretty big squad from the Premier League. Now, if you look at that list of outgoings, you'd think it's been a pretty poor window for Bournemouth. However, even with all of those departures, there's still a lot of quality in that squad when you look at it. And they actually kept hold of a few players who I think a few people thought would be off. You know, obviously the likes of David Brooks, who there was a lot of interest in. Josh King, his situation's still quite up in the air. He was very much angling towards a move. However, he is still a Bournemouth player up until January at least. So if he gets his head down, they've still got a fantastic player on their hands there. They've also brought in a couple of decent loan players as well. Raquelme comes in and Carter Vickers as well. Adds a bit more competition into those wide areas and to their defence as well. So overall for Bournemouth, I think it's still a competitive squad. I'd say they've had a solid window. For Derby County, it is a tough transfer window to judge because the deals that they have done, I think they've got some nice options in that squad now, especially in wide areas. Kemal Joswiak and Jordan Ibe adds real competition into those areas. You also look at the likes of David Marshall, who's a massive improvement on Ben Hamer, who they had last season. Nathan Byrne, who, while he isn't Jayden Bogle, I think he's a really good replacement and probably the best they could have got, obviously Bogle being the major departure. However, if we look at their options going forward, they lost Chris Martin and Jack Marriott on loan. Did they replace the goals they lost in that squad? I'm not convinced, with the replacement being a 34-year-old Colin Kazim-Richards. For that reason, and for that reason alone going forward, I'm going to put Derby into the could have done more category. I just feel like another striker was what Derby needed in this window. Moving on next to Cardiff, who had a bit of a slow start to the transfer window. They eventually got that deal over the line for Kiefer Moore. Big fan of him, as you all know, but then things started to slow down a little bit from there. But towards the end of the window, they brought in some really high quality players, especially on loan deals. The big one this season is Harry Wilson. I think that could go down as, in fact, the signing of the season. And just that signing isolated by itself really bumps Cardiff up a tier or two in this ranking video. You know, 20 goal contributions last time he was at Derby. Cardiff are a squad who's set up to be defensively resilient and are reliant on a little bit of individual quality to win the matches from time to time. They've got that now in Harry Wilson. Ojo, who's already been a match winner for them, won the game at Deepdale over the weekend, is a nice option. Filip Benkovic is an option at the back as well, adds real quality. For Cardiff, I'm going to put them into that top tier. I think it's been a superb window for them. Then we get to Gareth Ainsworth Wickham. Now, like we mentioned with Rotherham, from League One clubs coming up to the Championship, it's all about making their squad competitive at this level. Do I feel like Wickham have done that? I'm not overly convinced by some of the deals that they have done, I can't lie. I think it was always going to be a tough situation for Wickham, obviously being with the lowest budget in the league. But if you compare their business to Coventry and Rotherham, what they've managed to do in terms of some of the deals that they've got over the line with some of the quality that's come into their squad, I'm not sure if Wickham's transfer window completely matches up with those two. One of the incomings that I am excited to see how he does is Daryl Horgan, previously off Preston North End. He is someone who can come up with those game-changing moments as sort of an impact sub, a little bit of burst of acceleration, is someone who can get in behind. What I worry about with Wickham though is, are they going to score enough goals at this level, and have they adequately addressed that in this transfer window? I'm not too sure. For me, I'm going to put it down as a poor window because I'm not sure if they've made themselves competitive enough. Moving on next to Bristol City, where the major outgoing was Nicholas Eliasson. If you've been watching the channel for a while, you'll know that I was a massive fan of him. Obviously, he only had 12 months left on his contract though, and with the new system that Bristol City like to play, there wasn't really any room for a tricky winger like Eliasson, so I wasn't too surprised to see him being moved on. In terms of the incomings that they brought in though, I think they've strengthened the core group of players that they have in that squad. Chris Martin's already shown his quality. Picking him up on a free transfer, absolute bargain. No player has got more assists so far this season than Chris Martin. Joe Williams, a really nice option from Wigan, and I also think that they've done well with a couple of the loan deals they picked up as well. For Bristol City, going to say it was a great window. Next up to Stoke City, where I think Michael O'Neill's already admitted that this transfer window was always going to be about getting rid of some of those big earners off the wage bill, and in some aspects they have done that, with still a couple of them at the club. I like the incomings that they made. I think that on quite a cheap budget they've got some really good deals in this window. Johnny B. McKell, Stephen Fletcher I think will turn out to be an excellent bit of business. He's already been in the goals, obviously scored at the weekend. Jacob Brown, really good dynamic attacker coming over from Barnsley. And then one of the biggest transfer sagas surrounding Stoke this time round was the whole Jack Butland deal. They did manage to get that over the line and he has now departed. It's crazy to think that a few years ago he was rated at £30 million, and now obviously Angus Gunn has come in as his replacement. Listen, for Stoke, I think it's been a solid window. I like some of the additions that they have made. Could have done a little bit more, but that was always going to be reliant on getting some more players out the door. After that we get to Coventry, who I'd argue have probably had the best transfer window out of those promoted clubs. Listen, there's still an unknown, a question mark over a few of these transfers that have come in, but if you look at that squad that got promoted from League One, is it stronger now? Indefinitely. Gustavo Hamer being the big addition in this transfer window. We've spoken about him quite a bit on the channel so far. A midfielder who's got a real bite about him, but is a complete midfielder in terms of defensive work rate and creating chances for them going forward. I also think they've done some nice business in the loan market as well. Giles and McCallum had real competition down that left-hand side for them. And then Ben Chief and Ostergaard also look to be two real high-quality loan deals. So for Coventry all round, I'd say it's been a solid window, potentially pushing up into grey. For Swansea City, I would have had them in that top tier had they not sold Joe Rodon. It's going to be an interesting one to see how they fare at the back without him this season, but even if we dismiss that for a second, I think that Swansea have done some really brilliant business in this window. Last season it was all about the high quality loan players that they brought in. I think they've smashed it in that aspect this time round. Really unfortunate with the injury to Gibbs White, because I think he already showed from his brief few appearances so far for Swansea what he was all about and what he was actually going to add to that squad. But each of the loanees that they brought in I think improves their starting 11. Gyökeres was a striker who was in quite high demand coming over from Brighton, so I think that he will do quite well over the season. Getting Woodman back for the season, and obviously Casey Palmer as another alternative for a creative option. Ryan Manning on deadline day, absolutely brilliant bit of business. He's a player who can plug a few gaps and play a few positions. I'm expecting him to play in midfield, although can play at fullback as well. And then Jamal Lowe, who's also starting to form a partnership with AU going forward. For Swansea, I'm going to say it was a great window. It was pushing on to that top tier, but with the sale of Rodon, I'd just bump it down one. And as much as it pains me to say it, Blackburn Rovers have had an absolute stormer of a transfer market this time round. I think that each of the incomings has improved their starting 11 pretty much. Kaminsky, they're in need of a commanding shot stopper. They've got that in Kaminsky. Tyrese Dolan, I don't want to touch on too much because they've got an absolute steal from North End there. Daniel Ayola, I think, has the potential to form a really good championship partnership with Darrell Lenihan at the back. And then if you look at the loanees, high quality. Barry Douglas as a left back shores them up at the back. Harvey Elliott, a bit of an unknown at this level, but a player with a lot of pedigree. And then Tom Tribal adds their midfield options as well. Blackburn, I'm going to put them into that unreal tier. I think that they have absolutely smashed it. For QPR, this was going to be the window where they try their best to replace the quality lost in Iberieze. Do I feel like they've done that? And do you know what? I quite like some of the additions that they have made. I feel like the goals this season for QPR will be a little bit more spread out. They've got two good number 9s in there now in Macaulay Bonne and Dykes as well. I think two quite different options that they'll apply to different matches. I think they've added good quality into wide areas and into their midfield as well. One area where I do feel as if they could be a little bit light this season is at the back. Obviously they lost Ryan Manning on deadline day for next to nothing. Swansea got a great deal on him. I like the deal for Rob Dickey, but depth in that area may be a bit of a concern. For QPR though, I think it's been a solid window. They did the best with what they had. And then we get to Brentford, usually the masters of the transfer window. Now for Brentford, I think it was a given that Ollie Watkins and Ben Rama were going to be leaving this time round, so I don't feel as if you can mark Brentford's transfer window down on the fact that they lost those two players, because I think that was always going to happen. It was always going to be a question of how they go ahead and replace them. Have they got the adequate quality in that squad to compete at the top end of the championship? To be honest, I think they've done quite a good job here. Ivan Toney was a striker who was in massive demand for championship clubs. We even saw some Premier League clubs being linked at the time, and obviously he's got off to a great start now at Brentford, scored 4 goals in his last 2 matches for them now. Ben Rama, another big departure, obviously initially on a loan deal that's then going to become permanent, but they have got the added quality of Sam Ngoma Godos coming on. Perhaps a bit of an unknown quantity, but I feel as if that new forward three of Godos, Tony and Mbeumo will score a lot of goals this season. And for Brentford, I'm going to throw it into that great category. I think that for the money they've received and how they've reinvested it, they've done quite well. And then finishing it off with the most bonkers club we've seen in this transfer window, Nottingham Forest, where I couldn't actually fit all of their new signings onto this graphic I made. However, you can't deny that they have added real quality into that squad, and while losing the likes of Matty Cash, Thiago Silva, João Carvalho, there's certainly not a shortage of real quality and options in that squad for Forest going forward this season. So Chris Hughton really doesn't have any excuses for not getting the best out of these players. Some of the deals that they completed towards the end of the deadline, you know, Anthony Knockaert comes over as a real player of pedigree for the Championship. We're still waiting to see if they got the deal for Grosicki over the line as well. I think it can be a little bit disruptive though, bringing in as many players as Forest have, and I do think there will be a few players who they've signed here who whereby they'll probably play like 3 matches and then we'll never see them again. So from a few aspects, I do think it was a bit of a hit and miss transfer market for Nottingham Forest, but you can't question some of these signings that they have brought in. You know, Harry Arter's going to be good, Scott McKenna's already had an impact. For Forest overall and some of the names they brought in, I'm going to throw it into that great category. However, there is the feeling that it could all, you know, cave in on itself with this many incomings. But as you guys can see on screen now, those are my rankings for every Championship club in this transfer window. So do you guys agree with me? Let me know in the comments down below. But apart from that, guys, that will now wrap it up for today's video. So if you did go on to enjoy, make sure to leave a like. It is always massively appreciated, and please do stick around and subscribe for a bit of regular Championship content. So get your thoughts in the comments down below, but thanks very much for sticking around, and I'll see you all in the next one.